Fruit seller on the road gave $20 to a hungry girl. 15 years later a woman knocked on his door. The morning sun gently illuminated the road on the banks of Fazenda Boa Esperança. Albert Moreira was on his knees, organizing his improvised stand. The fruits, arranged in baskets, were their last hope against the challenges of time and the economy. At 48 years old, his muscles were fatigued, and the marks of years of hard work were visible on his face. Sweat ran down his forehead and his arms were covered in scars, silent witnesses of his life in the camp. In recent months, the wage system that supported the farm had collapsed. Albert and his colleagues found themselves thrust into a difficult reality. The local pharmacy closed, and the town stores struggled to stay open. The only way out was to sell fruit on the side of the road, where competition was intense and prices were unstable. The stand with its oranges, mangoes and bananas was a desperate attempt at success. Cosme, his neighbor with gray hair and calloused hands, often passed by. He had a special talent for working with wood and always helped Albert in any way he could. Albert knew that if he could afford it, he could repair the roof of his house, which was falling apart. Each storm brought the risk of more damage, and Cosme's help was critical to their safety. "Are you okay, Albert?" Cosme asked, approaching with concern. "I am, but sales are slow," Albert replied, forcing a tired smile. "Slow is not nearly enough, Cosme. I need a good sale today to buy the materials and pay for your time on the roof repair. I'm rooting for something to fall from the sky." Cosme nodded, understanding the situation. "I understand. I'll take a look at the roof after I help here. Just let me know if you sell anything, and we'll see what we can do about the stuff." Albert thanked him, feeling a mixture of relief and apprehension. Faith in better days seemed to slip through his fingers, but he needed to keep hope alive. He prayed in silence, not for a miracle, but for a simple push of luck that could ease the crushing load he carried. Cars passed by at a steady pace, but most just looked at the fruit and moved on. The afternoon heat seemed to stifle any hope of movement. Albert continued to arrange the fruits, aligning them with almost reverential care. Time passed, and his anxiety increased with each passing minute. His thoughts wandered, worried about the uncertain future and what he would do if he didn't get the money he needed to repair the roof. For now, his hope was focused on a single word: sale. As the afternoon wore on, he wondered if fate would finally give him the push he so desperately needed. Hours later, Albert was still bent over the table in his booth, trying to keep the fruit in order in the scorching midday heat. He looked at his neighbors, a few meters ahead, observing the movement of customers who were concentrated in strategic points, where it was easier to park. The surrounding vendors seemed to have a constant stream of buyers, and frustration began to overcome Albert. He knew space along the road was contested. With the best spots already occupied, he struggled to attract the attention of drivers, who passed at a slow pace in the heat of the day. The movement around him seemed to come to a standstill. Albert was thinking about how the number of buyers had drastically decreased in recent months. Only a few cars stopped, and most drivers cast a curious glance at their booth before moving on. Sweat dripped down his forehead, mixing with dust and fatigue. He felt increasingly desolate. Suddenly, a passenger bus stopped abruptly on the side of the road. Albert raised his head, attracted by the sound of the engine and the movement of passengers at the windows. The bus, although old and a little rusty, looked promising. Any kind of movement could mean a sale. His eyes followed a small group of passengers getting off. Soon, he noticed a young woman, no older than 12 or 13, running behind the bus and asking the driver to wait. With loose brown hair, the girl ran with a contagious energy, which clashed with her appearance. "Please, I just need one more moment," pleaded the young woman, her voice brimming with urgency and frustration. As he approached the bus door, the driver, a middle-aged man with a tired face, shook his head. "I already told you, girl, the bus is full and I can't take passengers for free. If you can't pay, you don't travel." The young woman continued to insist, but the driver, with an irritated sigh, closed the door and started the bus. She stood on the sidewalk, looking at the vehicle that was moving away, with a look of helplessness. Albert watched the scene, feeling a tightness in his chest. He knew how difficult it was to feel abandoned, and the young woman's expression showed that she was facing a particularly difficult time. Her desperation was palpable, and something inside him awakened a desire to help. In the midst of her own struggle, the girl's pain lit a flame of compassion in her heart. When the bus disappeared into the distance, the young woman remained there, with her head bowed and her shoulders slumped. Albert pondered for a moment what to do. He was so immersed in his own worries that he hesitated. But with an effort of determination, he slowly got up from his stand and walked towards her. "Hey, are you okay?" Albert asked, his voice gentle and concerned. "Can I help you with anything?" The young woman looked up, and he saw a gleam of surprise and hope in her eyes. She seemed about to respond, but her words were swallowed by the heat and tears that were beginning to form. At that moment, Albert's heart sank even more. He knew he couldn't offer much, but perhaps he could do something to alleviate the girl's situation and, perhaps, find an unexpected connection in the midst of his own difficulties. Albert watched the young woman with a mix of empathy and concern. He recognized her as Stella, a girl who vacationed on her family's farm and didn't seem to have much knowledge about the region. Her situation was desperate, and seeing her abandoned on the sidewalk, with tears beginning to flow, ignited a deep impulse of sympathy in Albert. With a gentle gesture, he approached Stella and offered a packet of fruit that he had placed aside, waiting for a sale that never came. "Here, take this," he said, holding out the package. "It's not much, but it might help." Stella looked at the package, her big eyes shining with a mixture of surprise and gratitude. "Thank you," she murmured, her voice shaking with emotion. Albert could see the relief and hope mixing in her gaze. But as Stella began to speak, Albert realized that his situation was much more complicated than he imagined. "I'm trying to go home. My parents separated, and I am being mistreated by my father's relatives here on the farm. I just want to go back, but the bus drivers don't want to wait for me because I don't have enough money for the ticket.
I wanted to talk to my father to get some money, but no one would let me call him." Stella's story broke Albert's heart. He knew the young woman was facing an emotional storm, and what little he had to offer seemed insignificant compared to what she was going through. However, Albert knew that whatever he could do would make a difference. He dived into his pants pocket and pulled out a 20 Brazilian reals bill, enough to cover the cost of the ticket to the nearest city. "Take this too," said Albert, placing the note in Stella's hand. "It's enough for the ticket. Go home and be safe." Stella looked at the note with wide eyes, clearly moved. Would you really do that for me?" His voice was full of disbelief and gratitude. Albert nodded, a warm smile forming on his face. "Yes, hurry up, don't let this opportunity pass you by." She hesitated for a moment, but, moved by emotion, gave Albert a quick hug. It was a simple gesture, but filled with deep and sincere gratitude. "Thank you very much. You don't know how much this means to me." With one last smile, Stella ran to the next bus that was stopping on the road. Albert watched as she climbed, the tension in her shoulders still visible but now accompanied by new hope. The bus left, and Stella sat at the window, waving to Albert with a renewed shine in her eyes. Her gesture of gratitude was the last image Albert saw before the bus disappeared into the distance. As the bus pulled away, Albert stood there, feeling his heart warmed by the act of kindness he had just performed. He felt a little lighter, knowing he had helped someone in their time of need. The midday heat still persisted, and the flow of buyers remained thin. But the hope he had given Stella seemed to have brought a little light to his own day. With a deep sigh, Albert returned to his booth, feeling a sense of accomplishment in his chest. He knew the challenges were far from over, but that small gesture of help was a reminder, even in difficult times, an act of kindness could create unexpected waves of change. And with that, he hoped that luck would finally start to change for him as well. Even hours later, Albert continued to stand on the side of the road, watching the bus disappear over the horizon. The sun was already starting to set, but the gesture of help he made that day brought an unexpected lightness. He sat down next to the booth and closed his eyes for a moment, silently praying for Stella's safety. The words of her prayer were simple but sincere, that she would find her way back home safely and that her life would become a little more bearable. With a deep sigh, Albert began to collect the fruits. The task of arranging the booth seemed almost automatic, but his hands moved with tired precision. The fruits were repositioned and adjusted while he occasionally glanced at the road, waiting for a customer to come along and save his day. However, the day seemed to end without much hope of sales. When the sun finally set, Albert decided it was time to go home. The journey back was marked by constant reflection on the day and its small victories and defeats. As he walked, the accumulated fatigue from years of work made his steps heavy, but the hope that Stella had left behind seemed to provide a slight impetus to continue. When Albert arrived home, he found everything as he had left it, worn down, but still standing. The deteriorating roof once again seemed like an unclimbable mountain, but the thought that Cosme had promised to help offered him a glimmer of hope. He knew there was still a lot to do and the fight was far from over, but at least he had something to look forward to. Albert entered the house, lit a candle and sat at the dining table, trying to rest a little before preparing something to eat. As he ate a simple bowl of soup, his thoughts wandered to Stella and the impact of her help. He wanted her to find comfort and security and wondered what else he could do to improve his own life and the lives of others around him. As the day drew to a close and the night enveloped the house in its peaceful darkness, Albert felt a wave of tiredness, but also a sense that the universe was conspiring on his behalf in unexpected ways. Little did he know that the act of kindness he had shown Stella was about to set off a chain of events that would transform his life in ways he could never have imagined, even if it took years to happen. 15 years have passed since that day when Albert helped young Stella. Time had not been kind to him. At the age of 63, Albert found himself fighting a new adversity, very different from those he had faced before. Fazenda Boa Esperança, his livelihood for decades, was now under new management. Dr. Robert, a man whose cold, calculating ambition was evident, had recently been appointed as the manager. Albert spent the last few months trying to regain financial stability, but difficulties persisted, threatening his security. He needed urgent help to resolve a situation that was about to become untenable. Determined to seek some relief, he decided to reach out to Robert, believing that perhaps the new manager could understand his situation and offer some assistance. That day, Albert walked into the farm office, feeling a mix of hope and apprehension. Robert was sitting behind a large desk, covered in papers and documents, with an arrogant smile that Albert could barely tolerate. The manager looked at him with a look that seemed to see beyond the man who dedicated his life to that farm. "Good morning, Dr. Robert," Albert began, his voice filled with palpable weariness. "I need to talk to you about a difficult situation I'm facing. My financial situation is very complicated, and I was hoping you could help me in some way." Robert raised an eyebrow and made a sneer. "Ah, Albert, it's always a pleasure to see you here," he said with a sarcastic tone that didn't go unnoticed. "What can I do for you today?" Albert took a deep breath, trying to remain calm. "I know the situation is not ideal, but I am looking for some kind of help." The farm has always been an important part of my life, and I have dedicated many years to working here. Now I'm struggling and I really need some support." Robert leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms in a dismissive manner. "Look, Albert, nothing is free here. The loyalty and time you've given mean nothing to me. We have a business to run, and if you are in financial trouble, that is your business. I can't offer anything without a quid pro quo." Robert's words were like a blow to Albert's stomach. The contempt and lack of empathy in the manager's tone was palpable, and he felt even more helpless and frustrated. It cut deep, representing an absolute disregard for everything he had given to the farm. Albert tried not to show the emotional impact he felt, but the feeling of desolation was intense. "So you can't do anything to help me?" Albert asked, his shaky voice giving away his disappointment. Robert shook his head with a look of indifference. "No. If you want a solution, you'll have to find it on your own. If you need anything else, you may have to negotiate with someone outside of here." With a curt nod, Robert turned his attention to the papers on the table, clearly indicating that the conversation was over. Albert turned around, feeling the weight of the words and the coldness of the treatment. The feeling of having dedicated his life to something that now seemed worthless was overwhelming. He left Robert's office with a heavy heart and a mind clouded with frustration and humiliation. Robert's dismissive words echoed in his mind as he walked, his anger and sadness mixing in a whirlwind of emotions. Powerlessness consumed him, and he wondered how he had reached such a low point after so many years of dedication and hard work. As he passed through the farmyard, he saw Lucy, one of his neighbors. She was busy with some chores in the garden, but her attentive gaze caught Albert's distressed expression. She knew him well enough to realize something was deeply wrong. "Albert, what happened?" Lucy asked, with a tone of concern as she approached. "You look completely shaken." With tears in his eyes that he desperately tried to control, Albert couldn't hold back his emotion. "Lucy, it's unfair. Dr. Robert just doesn't care what I'm going through. He treated me with contempt, as if my entire life working here meant nothing. He refused to help me, and I don't know what to do." Lucy immediately wrapped him in a comforting hug.
"Before we continue, I need to tell you something amazing. Do you want to attract a lot of money into your life? Learn how to do it with the secret content that I will leave in the first pinned comment, and start transforming your financial life. Let's continue."
"Oh, Albert, I'm so sorry about that. Come, let's talk. You shouldn't go through this alone." She led him firmly, but with a gentle touch, to her home. Along the way, Albert vented about everything that had happened. He talked about Robert's cruelty, the contempt he felt, and the feeling of being completely abandoned. The words came out of his mouth in an anguished torrent. "I dedicated my life to this farm," Albert said, his voice breaking. "And now it seems like all this effort means nothing. I don't know where to go or what to do. I feel like I'm fighting against a wall of indifference and cruelty." Lucy continued to listen, offering words of comfort and encouragement. Halfway there, Albert felt a little more relieved to have someone by his side. Lucy helped support him, offering a shoulder to lean on and making sure he felt at least somewhat welcomed, despite the gravity of the situation. Albert looked at Lucy with a mixture of gratitude and despair. "Thank you for being here, Lucy. I don't know what I would do without you." Lucy smiled gently, her hands resting on top of Albert's. "You are not alone, Albert. Let's find a way to get through this. I promise we will figure out a solution together. I won't let you face this without support." When Albert and Lucy arrived at Albert's house, they were greeted by an unexpected scene. An elegant Ferrari was parked in front of the house, attracting attention with its shine and style, contrasting with the simplicity of Albert's residence. A man and a woman stood next to the car, and Albert immediately noticed the difference in style between them. The older man wore an impeccable suit and had an imposing presence, appearing like a figure of authority. The woman next to him was wearing a dress shirt and jeans, and there was a familiarity in her gaze that made Albert pause for a moment. It was then that the young woman approached, and the reality of the moment unfolded before him. "Albert Moreira?" asked the older man, in a deep and cordial voice. Albert, surprised and confused, nodded. "Yes, it's me. And you are?" "I'm James Good Hope," the man introduced himself, extending his hand with a courteous smile. "And this is Stella Boa Esperança. Maybe you recognize her." Albert looked at Stella and immediately remembered the desperate young woman he had helped years ago. She had grown up and looked stunning, with a confident presence. "Stella?" Albert asked, in a tone full of surprise and excitement. Are you that Stella?" Stella smiled, her eyes shining with a mix of gratitude and joy. "Yes, Albert. I remember you very well. I promised that one day we would meet again so I could personally thank you for your help when I needed it most." James, still with a sincere smile, continued, "Stella and I traveled to look for you. A few days ago, she told me for the first time about the kind gesture you showed her, and I wanted to come and thank you in person. The kindness you showed has left a lasting mark on our lives." Albert, still stunned, tried to hide his embarrassment as he looked at the modest condition of his house. I didn't expect a visit from someone like that. Sorry about the state of the house. I'm going through financial difficulties and I don't have much to offer." Stella and James exchanged a look of surprise when they noticed the precarious condition of the house. James, showing a gesture of understanding, said, "Don't worry about it, Albert. We come to thank you and support you in any way we can. In fact, we would like to stay in the city for a few days. If you have a place we can stay, that would be great." Albert hesitated for a moment, looking at the simple house. "Well, I have a room available, although it is small and simple." "That's more than enough," replied James with an encouraging tone. "If you don't mind, we'd love to stay here with you. We can talk more and try to help in any way we can." Touched by the generosity and genuine interest, Albert agreed and began preparing the room for his visitors. While he was busy organizing the space, James took out his cell phone and started making calls, with a focused and determined look. "I'm going to investigate a little about the situation at Fazenda Boa Esperança, since part of it still belongs to my family," James said to Albert. "There may be something we can do to help with your difficulties." Lucy, who had witnessed the scene with a look of surprise, smiled at Albert and the visitors. "It looks like things are about to get better for you," she said before taking her leave. However, Albert, realizing that it was already late, invited her to spend the night there. He offered her his own bed and said he would sleep on the couch. Although a little embarrassed, Lucy accepted the offer and was willing to help Albert tidy up the room for the guests. As Albert prepared the room, the feeling of being on the verge of a significant change began to form. The unexpected meeting with Stella and James brought a new wave of hope into his life, and he felt a mixture of gratitude and anxiety for what the future might hold. The room, although modest, was arranged with care, and Albert did his best to ensure that his visitors felt comfortable. When he joined Stella and James in the room, the atmosphere was lighter, with the prospect of a new beginning in sight. The next morning, Albert woke up with a clear sense of expectation. Last night, although full of new hope, had also been a mixture of anxiety and expectation. When he got up and went to the kitchen to prepare breakfast, something unusual caught his attention outside. In front of the house, a man with a construction helmet and a briefcase of tools was inspecting the property with a watchful, professional eye. Albert rubbed his eyes, thinking he was seeing things. "Lucy, did you see that?" Albert asked, his voice full of disbelief. Lucy, who was preparing coffee, peeked out the window and was also surprised. "It looks like we have an unexpected visitor. Let's see what's going on." As Lucy and Albert approached the entrance, Stella and James were already outside, talking to the man. Stella, noticing Albert and Lucy's arrival, approached with a beaming smile. "Albert, I want you to meet Leonard Galvio. He is the local contractor and was hired to evaluate and repair your home." Albert stopped, frozen, and his heart beat faster. "Leonard Galvio? But I can't afford a contractor. I don't know how that was possible." Leonard turned to Albert, smiling warmly and extending his hand. "Good morning, Albert. Stella and James told me about their situation. I'm here to help, and don't worry about the cost. They already took care of it." Albert was stunned. The gesture of having a renowned contractor evaluate your home seemed almost unrealistic. He looked at Stella and James, his eyes teary, unable to find the right words to express his gratitude. "I don't know what to say. This is too much. I can't thank you enough." Stella placed a comforting hand on Albert's arm. "Albert, you don't have to worry about anything. What we did is a way to repay the kindness you showed years ago. My dad and I wanted to do something meaningful for you, and this is our way of showing our gratitude." James, who was next to Stella, nodded with a serious but gentle look. "The kindness you offered my daughter in those difficult days made a huge difference in our lives. Now is the time to give back some of that kindness. Renovating your home is just the beginning. We want to make sure you are comfortable and safe." Albert was emotional, feeling a lump in his throat. Stella and James' support, especially at such a difficult time, felt like a dream. "I don't know how you guys did it, but I'm eternally grateful. I have no words to express how much this means to me." Leonard gestured for him to calm down. "Let's take a look at the house and see what needs to be done. Don't worry about anything, as I will be here to coordinate everything." While Albert and Lucy accompanied Leonard as he inspected the house, Stella and James stayed by his side, talking through the details of the project and making sure Albert felt as comfortable as possible. The precarious state of the house was carefully examined, and Leonard took detailed notes, explaining to Albert what would be needed for the renovations. During the day, Albert's house began to take on a new energy. The presence of Leonard and the repair team brought a sense of renewal, and Albert felt as if life was taking an unexpected turn in his direction. The sense of relief and gratitude was palpable, and Stella and James' support felt like a blessing in the midst of hardship. As he watched the first steps of the reforms, Albert reflected on how a simple act of kindness had set in motion such a transformative chain of events. He was surrounded by friends and supporters who, unexpectedly, were helping to turn around a situation that seemed hopeless. The day ended with a feeling of progress and a new perspective on the future. Albert knew there would still be challenges, but with the support of Stella, James, and Leonard's help, he was beginning to see a real possibility of renewal. A week later, Albert's house was undergoing complete transformation. The noise of saws and hammers filled the air, keeping pace with the workers busy with renovations. Albert stood in a corner, watching in amazement at the progress being made. The once worn and decaying walls were now being rebuilt, and he could hardly believe the change that was taking place. As he contemplated the work in progress, a familiar sound of engines approached. Albert saw a familiar truck entering the property, and his heart quickened when he recognized the vehicle from Fazenda Boa Esperança. The truck stopped, and from inside it emerged Dr. Robert, with an expression of anger and contempt. "Robert!" Albert exclaimed, but Robert walked to the entrance of the house with heavy steps and a face full of indignation. "James," he called, with an accusatory tone. "What is that? Are you spending money on strangers while your own workers go unpaid?" The accusation was like a punch in the gut for Albert. He felt a mixture of shame and frustration, knowing that Robert was referring to the support that Stella and James had offered. Albert wanted to defend himself, but the situation was beyond his control. Upon seeing Robert arrive with such an attitude, he immediately took the lead. He approached Robert with a firm and decisive stance. "Robert, I suggest you remain calm and listen to what I have to say. I'm here to discuss the situation at Fazenda Boa Esperança and its management practices." Robert tried to protest, but James gave him no room to interrupt. "You have no right to accuse Albert, especially when the practices at the farm under his management have been so unfair. I will demand a full audit of the farm's finances and a review of its payment practices. After all, I own the business too." The tension between the two men was palpable. Robert, clearly uncomfortable with the situation, tried to defend himself. "James, this is none of your business. I'm just taking care of my responsibilities." James didn't back down. "No, Robert, that's my business now. The way you are treating workers is unacceptable. I will ensure that you face legal consequences for the unfair practices you have maintained on the farm. The time for impunity is over." Albert watched from afar, his mind spinning in a mixture of relief and disbelief. The scene before him seemed surreal. Dr. Robert, the man who had disregarded his hardships, now being faced with the consequences of his actions. The confrontation was intense, but there was something deeply satisfying about seeing Robert being challenged by James. Stella, beside Albert, watched the scene with an amused smile. She turned to him and said, in a light tone, "I think Robert is going to have a difficult day. I wouldn't want to be in his position right now." Albert laughed, even through the tension. "It seems like things are finally taking a different turn. I can't believe all of this is happening." James and Robert finally made their way to James's Ferrari, which was parked next to Robert's truck, to finish their conversation in private. Robert looked frustrated, carrying an expression of anger and discomfort as he entered the vehicle. James, on the other hand, was calm and determined, with a determined look in his eyes that showed he was willing to do whatever was necessary to rectify the situation. Stella approached Albert and hugged him, with a smile on her face that reflected the relief and satisfaction they both shared. "I think the worst is finally over, Albert, and the best is just beginning." After Robert's departure and the brief commotion, Albert and Stella met on the porch of the house, spending the day talking. Lucy, who soon said goodbye and returned to her house, left the two alone. Hours later, the sun began to set, illuminating the room with a soft, golden light. The transformation of the house continued, with workers moving around and the sound of tools echoing in the background. Exhausted, Albert was about to settle down for a night's rest when Stella approached, with a radiant look and full of contagious joy. "Albert, I need to tell you something," she said, with a gleam of excitement in her eyes. Albert, still immersed in the feeling of relief and gratitude, looked at her curiously. "What is it?" Stella took a deep breath before continuing. "My father and I discussed a lot about how we could help more and decided that we would like to visit the city regularly. In fact, we want to transform your home into a kind of second home for us. Therefore, we will help you financially with a considerable amount so that you can take care of the house for us." Albert was stunned for a moment, and his heart quickened with emotion. Transform the house into a second home? But why? Stella smiled, with an expression that reflected deep sincerity. "Well, I don't have a voice and, honestly, my mother's house is not a place where I feel welcome. But here, with you, I feel at home. And I think my father feels it too. This is a way of showing how much we appreciate your kindness and how much you meant to us. We want you to know that you are not alone and that you will always have our presence and support." Stella's words touched Albert deeply. He felt a surge of emotion that almost made him cry. Stella's offer wasn't just help, it was a gesture of inclusion and affection that he had missed for many years. The idea of having such a meaningful connection and sense of belonging in his life was something he didn't expect, but deeply desired. "Stella, I don't know how to thank you," Albert said, his voice breaking. "This proposal is more than I could have imagined. I feel deeply touched and grateful for the offer." Stella approached and, with a loving gesture, wrapped Albert in a tight hug. Tears began to flow from both of their eyes, reflecting the deep emotion and relief they felt. "No need to thank me, Albert. We just wanted to let you know how important you are to us. And besides, you'll have a family here whenever you need it." Albert hugged Stella back, feeling a sense of warmth and comfort that he hadn't experienced in a long time. Stella and James' proposal not only offered a practical solution to his difficulties, but also provided a sense of community and support that he had missed. As they pulled away from the hug, Albert looked around the house, which was in the process of being transformed. Every hammer and saw that sounded now seemed a symbol of a new beginning. The house was becoming a space full of hope and opportunities for a better future. "You guys have really made a huge difference in my life," Albert said, his voice full of gratitude. "Not only for the practical help, but for the way we connect. This means more to me than I can express." Stella smiled and held Albert's hand. "We are happy to be able to help and look forward to sharing many more memories with you. The house will be a special place for us, and I hope for you too." Albert nodded, feeling that kindness and helping each other really had a deep and meaningful impact. He knew the road ahead would still have its challenges, but with the support of Stella and James, and with the renovation of his home symbolizing a new beginning, he felt he was about to enter a new phase of his life, marked by hope and for the connection I had sought for so long. Over the next few days, as the renovations progressed, the transformation of Albert's home became increasingly evident. The home that was once in ruins, with worn-out walls and a deteriorating roof, now emerged as a space full of life. Each day, the construction team made progress, and Albert felt a growing sense of gratitude and hope. The new space was taking shape, with a mix of modern and welcoming styles, reflecting both practical functionality and the desire to create a pleasant environment. What were once crumbling rooms were now transformed into bright and airy environments, with new colors and furniture that brought a feeling of freshness and revitalization. The repaired roof gleamed in the sun, and the structure of the house looked more solid and promising. When the renovation was finally completed, Albert's house became his new refuge, a place steeped in comfort. Albert walked through the new rooms, admiring the work done and feeling a deep sense of accomplishment. Over the next few months, Stella and James' constant presence in Albert's life brought a new dynamic to his routine. Each of their visits was marked by moments of joy and connection. Stella, now a close friend, helped decorate the house and often brought little surprises that made the place even more welcoming. James, in turn, continued to offer his support and valuable advice, not only about the house, but also about life in general. Little by little, Albert began to adjust to the new dynamics of his life. He allowed himself to relax and enjoy the simple moments that once seemed out of reach. Afternoons spent chatting in the renovated garden or peaceful evenings in the new living room were memories that Albert treasured deeply. The house, now a space of joy and comfort, became a place where he could reflect on the generosity and dedication that had marked his life. The kindness Albert had offered in the past was being rewarded in ways he never could have imagined. The return of Stella and James, with their unconditional friendship and support, created meaningful bonds and new memories that enriched their daily lives. This way, Albert felt more complete and at peace. Stella and James' help had not only restored his home, but also rekindled a sense of hope and purpose in his life. Although adversity could still arise, he now had a solid foundation of support and a new perspective on the value of kindness and friendship. So, did you like the story? So leave your like on the video, subscribe to the channel, and comment below what you thought of the story. Until next time.